You're listening to the Rethreading Madness podcast, which airs live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. We are recorded and produced on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations around Vancouver, BC. I'm your host, Bernadine Fox, and this is the show that dares to change how we think about mental health. Welcome to our show.
I've never been further, knowing what the hell I'm gonna do when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and today I have brought back Rob Wipond, who is a freelance journalist who writes frequently on the interfaces between psychiatry, civil rights, policing, surveillance and privacy, and social change. His articles have been nominated for 17 magazine and journalism awards. He is the author of Your Consent Is Not Required, The Rise in Psychiatric Detentions, Forced Treatments, and Abusive Guardianships. Rob has been a previous guest of Rethreading Madness. He is the author of a current opinion piece in a recent Globe and Mail wherein he warns us about a potential consequence to the new 988 hotline here in Canada coming into effect November 2023. Welcome, Rob.
Hello, thank you for having me.
This is an interesting piece to come across my desk. Someone sent it to me saying, hey, look at this. This was an interesting piece to come across my desk because I actually just interviewed the Crisis Intervention and Suicide Prevention Center here in BC, Stacey Ashton, about this new 988 hotline that's coming into effect. And so I had my concerns about it, and those concerns you talked about in this opinion piece. So tell me a little bit about, well, let's start with your book. Let's just give people a reminder of what your book is about. Your Consent Is Not Required. Why did you write that book, and what is it about?
Well, I wrote it in part, it touched my own personal life and that I witnessed my own father being forcibly treated in a psychiatric hospital in British Columbia, and that it was just an appalling and brutal experience for him to go through. And he really, in some ways, never fully recovered from it. And I immediately started to wonder, who else is this happening to and what's happening to them? And so I started to research the experience of being locked up in a psychiatric hospital in Canada and forcibly treated. And then that just led to me realizing that these laws are being used much more broadly across society against a much wider range of people than most people realize, because it's just not covered that much in the news media. And so I wanted to write about that. And that's what ultimately led to the book. Over years, I saw more and more examples of these diverse ways and diverse circumstances under which mental health laws were being used against people. And yeah, that's where I ended up. And then 988 is really just one part of that.
Why do you think they brought in this hotline? I mean, Stacey talked about it as being this wonderful addition that will make it so much easier for people. But I remember doing our interview, and I remember you talking about how mental health assessments were being sort of pushed across the board to more and more people being able to assess whether or not someone is in danger and how that can be misused and construed. And it made me wonder how this is going to impact on that. So why do you think they needed to do this?
I don't think they needed to do this. I think there were various motivations on the part of the people pushing it. Governments mainly just saw it as, oh, this is like an amazingly high profile thing we can do to make it look like we're doing something on mental health. And mental health is really, has become a buzzword for our time in the last decade or so, more and more, that this is something governments are supposed to care about. They're supposed to do something about. And so it was a very high profile maneuver. And then at the same time, I have little doubt, based on the documents I've seen and people I've talked to, that this was a positioning move by the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in the United States first. And this is where it really started. Canada's only getting it because the United States got it, and there's all this publicity around it now. So in the United States, it was really pushed by Vibrant Emotional Health, the nonprofit that ran the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline there. realizing that this could be an opportunity for them to expand their range of influence and power and control, really, of the entire crisis suicide prevention system in the United States. And so that's indeed what has happened now. Vibrant Emotional Health is in control of the entire system in the United States now. And basically, if you're a crisis center, the way this is all playing out, if you're not involved with 988, you're going to be really struggling for funding in the short-term near future. And so a similar model was brought into Canada. The Center for Addiction and Mental Health out of Toronto has been put in charge of it by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And it's a sort of affiliated system. All these crisis centers, like the one in British Columbia that you just mentioned, are becoming part of that 988 system. Now, certainly the pitch is, oh, well, this will make it easier for people to remember. But it's not like people had any trouble, looking up a crisis line number. What it is going to do, I think, people who really wanted to call it, what it is going to do is expand the number of people who think about, oh, I could call it, because now it's going to be in everybody's head, the enormous amount of promotion. You'll just always know that number's there and available. You won't even have to go look up a crisis center in your community and find the number. So I have no doubt that it will vastly increase the number of people who are calling these lines for any of a number of reasons.
What's the most overt reason somebody would call? And of course, the answer is suicide. They're thinking of committing suicide or having suicide ideas. I think in some ways, suicide is such a scary thing in our society that if you even think about it, somehow that is bad. That's dangerous to even have that thought. But I think on average, the number of people who actually think of suicide in their lifetime is a very high percentage of people. Now we're talking about people who actually act on it in some capacity, but people who just think about it. Do you have that number?
Well, yeah, the numbers really vary, and we can look at completed suicide rates in any given year in any given country. And that's really the most clear and firm number that we can identify. From that, yes, we have these surveys. Really, already it starts to get fuzzy, because you say, how do we define somebody has thought about suicide, right? Well, literally everyone has. You mentioned the word, they're thinking about it. So how do we then go on to scientifically define, well, you were thinking about it in a quote unquote serious way, or, making a plan? Like, how do we define these things? It gets very fuzzy. And so I've seen surveys that say 25% of the population has thought seriously about attempting suicide. Even that number, though, I don't really understand it. You can kind of look at the wording of their surveys and go, well, yeah, how might even have I answered that question on any given day, right? I think the number is vast and huge. Basically, I think there's almost no one I know who's literally never thought about it, never contemplated it. So, yeah, and that's relevant because some significant percentage of those people are going to be calling this line, and they may never actually attempt suicide. And what is even an attempted suicide? Even that gets a little bit fuzzy, and we could talk about that with 988, because they use this term a lot. Oh, we intervene with people who are attempting suicide, and you discover when you look into it that they have a very broad definition of what they consider a person who is attempting suicide.
So we know that lots of people have considered suicidal ideation. Sometimes emotional pain can get really overwhelming. People don't know how to continue on. They call a hotline. One of the things that you describe in this opinion piece is a example of what happened to a teenager who you talked to for a brief period of time about what happened to him when he called an anonymous confidential crisis hotline. And of course, that's how they bill these things, that they're confidential and they're anonymous and you can talk freely. But what happened to him?
So, yeah, you just hit on my main problem here in this whole thing is they're advertised as confidential. If you don't go read the fine print, you would assume that this call is in fact confidential, but they routinely breach confidentiality. So for example, this teen was indeed feeling somewhat suicidal and wanted to discuss those feelings, made the call, and the person on the other end of the line, the call attendant, decided that what they were hearing was concerning enough that they thought this this child might in fact do it. And so based on that kind of belief, secretly contacted 911, and 911 traced the location of the mobile device of this child. And the police came to the child's home, and in front of the shocked and horrified parents, the teen was taken away in handcuffs, taken to a psychiatric hospital. By this point, the teen is really afraid and shocked and had no idea this could even happen, doesn't understand what's going on, is starting to sob uncontrollably. So now they forcibly drug this child with a tranquilizer to calm him down. And he's describing this to me as a complete, like one of the most devastating experiences he's ever had in his life now. So he went from thinking he was having a private, confidential conversation to alleviate his feelings of kind of discomfort and stress to one of the most stressful and difficult experiences of his life. And he was saying to me, yeah, I'm never going to feel safe talking to anyone ever again. And indeed, cut off the exchange with me very quickly as soon as he got a feeling that I was probing a little too much, just trying to find out more about him and his feelings, his level of safety or whatever, right? And him suddenly going, wait, what's your motive here? Right. I'm out of here, and I sent him a message. I'm going, that's fine. I totally understand. Don't worry. Right. I'm not contacting police right now.
And therein lies the proof of the impact this will have on many, many people. So here's this teenager in pain, emotional pain, reaching out as he has been told to do, to get help as he's been told to do. One of the things that was in the opinion piece that I really want to point out was that not only did all of those things happen to him, but that when he was in the hospital, he was ordered to strip naked for a body inspection. In my opinion, that's akin to being sexually assaulted. And I don't care what we call it in a hospital, that it's a medical intervention of some kind. It involves being naked in front of other people and having your body touched, inspected, whatever, against your will. So this whole experience went from, I'm reaching out for help in this healthy way that I'm supposed to do, to having tremendous trauma land on top of him in a way that's probably going to impact him for the rest of his life.
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know how people justify this, really. Like, what is this person, just collateral damage? We're not supposed to worry about it. We're not supposed to be concerned that this is happening, and that we can actually find the numbers, people that this is happening to, and they're quite high. And it's just pitched as, well, but there might be that one person that we're saving too. So it's a trade-off, right? Well, no, I mean, maybe there's another way to do this where we don't have to cause that kind of damage to people. And I'm really concerned about it.
There was a stat that you had in the article here where you talk about that the suicide rate was approximately 100 times the global average in the first 3 months after this type of hospitalization, and 200 times that rate for those who had admitted suicide thoughts. So in fact, this kind of treatment is in fact pushing people towards suicide, as opposed to, helping all of them, even if we help one. The other part of that, Rob, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, I believe that in our society, mental health consumers don't have the same rights, that we have come from a society that has historically treated them without any consideration or thought, that they've been used for medical experimentation, that you can do things to mental health consumers you can't do to other people. And so this kind of treatment is sort of kind of par for the course, that they don't have to consider their human rights. And I know you know that, because I've read that in your book even, so probably not in the same words that I just used.
One, just clarifying that particular study. I mean, the study doesn't prove that necessarily psychiatric hospitalization causes these dramatic increases in completed suicides and suicidal feelings. But those of us who look at it, if you would all know what a psychiatric hospital is like, you can really readily believe that it's probably causing it. But these studies simply show a correlation rather than a causation. But it's really important that people understand how the best evidence we have is saying that hospitalizing someone for suicidal feeling looks like about the worst possible thing you could ever do to that person. And a dramatic increase occurs. We don't know what's exactly causing it, but a dramatic increase occurs as a result of that event. So it's very concerning. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I did want to say, with respect to the numbers, it's important to know that although certainly suicidal feelings are the single most common reason people call these crisis lines, in fact, they're still only 20% of the calls, generally, the best stats we have. So many people call these hotlines for many other reasons. They may call about someone else, just to sort of confide in their own feelings about someone and get some guidance or suggestions on how to talk with that person or what to do. They may be calling about just sort of stress in their lives that they want to share with someone else who doesn't know them personally. So people will talk about workplace problems. They'll talk about problems at home with their family and things like that, that they're not necessarily feeling suicidal at all. And that's important because when we get into looking at how many people are getting these kinds of very aggressive interventions against them, the rates that this is happening relative to their suicidality are very, very high, because we have to actually factor in that 80% of the calls coming into these lines aren't even about suicide.
One of the other things that you mentioned in here was that this 988 number, at least in the United States, is employing tracing by covertly connecting to 911. And so the examples of what happened to this teenager, does that mean that it's going to happen more often, say, with the beginning of 988?
Yeah, so the best numbers we have drawn from crisis lines in Canada that studied their own data, they found that about 3% of people who call these lines will get subjected to some kind of policing intervention. Now, not all of those are fully, quote unquote, against the person's consent. However, that's a blurry area too. They don't really bring together the kind of data that would allow us to look at that in depth. They're just defining it loosely, saying if they can one way or another get the person to agree to tell them where they are, then they consider that consent. Of course, it's very easy for you to just pressure someone and just say, look, if you don't give us your address, we're going to contact 911 and they can trace your call. So it's probably safer for you that if we tell the police when they're coming to your house that you agreed. Right? Because it can be very threatening if the police are being told this person has not agreed, they may be resistant and things like that. So I don't even know what that number means, but the number we do have is 3% of calls these kinds of interventions will result. And within that, I want to highlight that actually looks to be, based on the best data we have, about 5 times higher among people who are calling with suicidal feelings, because they're only a fraction of the people who call. So that's now up to 10 or 15% of people who call these lines with suicidal feelings will get this kind of an intervention. To me, that's an astoundingly high number.
It is. Thanks for coming and chatting with me about this. It's scary stuff, but I think anybody who has a mental health challenge needs to understand what they're coping with. So thank you. I appreciate it.
I agree. Yeah, I think that needs to be public awareness about this. You have the right to know what can happen in these kinds of situations. And that's why I wrote the article and hope to continue educate people so that they can make that decision then for themselves, what they want to share and not share when they call one of these lines.
Exactly. And that is important for us to all be aware, anybody who has a mental health challenge, to be aware of what we're dealing with out there, what these resources look like on both ends of the spectrum, the good side and the bad side. So thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and right now I get to chat with Barbara, who is a playwright and a spoken word artist. She experienced some I don't want to say some, because spiritual abuse is horrible, so there's no some about it, and gave birth to 4 lovely children. So welcome, Barbara.
Hi.
I wanted to talk to you because I know you went through a forced commitment. I'm not sure, did that happen in BC here?
I've been through a couple of forced commitments. My first one was in New Westminster at Royal Columbian Hospital.
Okay.
And it was because the powers that be, the three they usually have to have 3 doctors who sign you off for as an involuntary patient. They deemed me suicidal. So.
And so when you say that was their take, that doesn't sound like that was what was true for you.
No, it wasn't what was true for me, but
Right.
it totally locked me down. And then as a result, I was given little to no. I think the big problem was that I was explaining to them that I'd been subjected to spiritual abuse, and because in their grid of understanding, there is no such thing.
Yes, and this was 1994, you said before. So yeah, in
Right?
1994, I don't think we really understood abuse by clergy or the church in any capacity.
I don't even know if we still do, quite frankly.
Probably
I mean,
not.
I look at the church and I still see rampant manipulations, done by people who authentically think they're trying to do good. And
Right.
it's like, it just breaks my heart, because it's such, it should be a safe place for people, not a place for people to go and be psychologically violated.
Right, exactly. So what happened? Did the police show up? How did the forced commitment happen?
The thing is I was incredibly vulnerable. Like, I felt so broken and so devastated to my core. I felt like someone had peeled all my skin off of me. Like, and I was a mother of 4 young kids, the eldest being 6. And my husband, who works out of town, he's a blue collar guy. So it's like, so when I went down and when I talked to the intake psychiatrists and doctors, I was like, look, I'm dealing with this and I've been subjected to abuse and I'm really concerned. And at the beginning, they actually thought what I was saying was credible, but later they thought it was my psychosis.
And
But
were you diagnosed with anything that had psychosis attached to it before?
Absolutely, because right after Christmas, December 27th, I had a really graphic break, like fall to the floor, to blackout.
Mm-hmm.
I'd actually jumped into my daughter's bassinet because I was basically losing my nut, and I was losing my nut. So yes, the ambulance attendants came, they took me out, they tied me, one hand over my head, one down by my hip on a gurney. And we were only 4 or 5 blocks from Royal Columbian Hospital. So they brought me there and they left me in the hallway tied like that. And I said to, one of the overseeing nurses, these ties are cutting into my wrist. Can you loosen them? They're like, no, Mrs. Phillips, we can't.
Wow.
We can't do that. Right. No, not until they were ready to, inject me with Haldol and put me in the cell. So that was.
So had you exhibited any violence up to that point to require a restraint?
No, I'm not.
No,
I'm not a violent person.
right.
I mean, I had yelled at these people who, I felt were spiritual abusers. Like they were religious manipulators, and I yelled at them, I was like,
That's okay. Yelling is okay.
And but then I ran across the room and I jumped into the bassinet, right? So, I mean, my husband phones 911. Yeah, it's like, whoa, my wife just lost her noodle, right? So it was like, so that, but when I went in that time, I was like, what the hey happened to me? Like, I was just dazed and confused. I just was going, nobody, at that point, it wasn't involuntary. I wasn't locked with a key type thing and thrown away yet. It was the second time I was in that they committed me. Yeah.
So the first time, did they treat you with care and consideration, or when the police came?
Was just like, what? Well, I don't, because I went to blackout. I don't think the police were there. I think it was the ambulance attendants. And, I mean, the sad thing is they left me in the hallway for hours.
I know. What is that? And tied up. Yeah.
And then, when they untie me, there's like 1 male nurse and 2 male security guards, all dressed in white, forcibly putting a needle of Haldol in my butt, and stripping my clothes off. Like, it's like, whoop.
Did they ask you to take your clothes off, or did they just start taking your clothes off?
No.
They just started taking your clothes off.
Yeah.
Was this in the hallway?
Well, no, it was actually in the cell.
Oh, okay. So a cell.
She's dangerous.
Right. So they put you into what they call an isolation room. The good word is
There's three
isolation
there,
room.
and super archaic ones, like just
Right.
super. One of them doesn't even have a toilet. Like it's like they are the prison cells of all prison cells, you know. You've
And in
got
a hospital.
Yeah, and so that second time I was in, because I was, like I told you, really sad and
Mm,
really vulnerable, they had the grate in the middle of it, you know, because you can hose the room down, right?
right.
And I was curled in a fetal position over the grate, just crying,
Oh,
crying into the cell. And then that male nurse, he's like, there's a little window that goes open, open and
right.
close. He opens it up, and goes, Mrs. Phillips, if you don't settle down, we're going to come in and inject you. I'm like,
Because you were crying?
because I was crying.
Crying is not okay.
Oh, it's verboten in psychiatric wards. You're supposed to be sedated. You're supposed to be a numb marshmallow, and hopefully you're supposed to have a smile on your face.
Right.
And that will keep the staff happy. If you indicate any discomfort or sadness,
I mean, I
that's not
sit there and I'm sitting here, kind of, I want to say shocked, but then I'm not shocked, but I am disappointed that in a mental health establishment, people aren't allowed to have normal emotional reactions to what's going on for them without being called crazy. That
And
I
I
find
mean,
that,
I'm going to be honest, on both admissions, you know, my emotions were heightened. Yeah, they
of
were heightened.
course,
I mean,
of course they were.
and then I was really quiet when they took me off the gurney.
Mhm.
I was really quiet when they stripped me down, changed me, and put me in the room. But I was a breastfeeding mother who was locked in a cell,
Right.
you know. And when they took me out, oh my goodness, they took me out to talk to the psychiatrist and the overseeing nurse. For some reason, they got the wrong file. And then they said, you're Jennifer Ward on the methadone program. And I was like, you know what I thought? Bernadine,
No.
I thought I pulled through a black hole in space,
Right.
right? Because it was traumatic going in there.
Of course.
That now I was no longer Barbara Phillips. I was
Somebody
Jennifer
else.
Ward on the methadone program.
And
I
did
was
you
like,
say,
oh.
did you say, no, I'm not?
No, I just sat there quietly. I sat there quietly. I had nothing to say. I was just like, because I didn't know what had happened, right? I was just so, you know, I was so challenged in that moment. And then they picked up the right file and they, oh, you're Barbara Phillips, you know. And then it was like, and you asked about the psychosis thing. The diagnosis from that break was postpartum psychosis.
Right.
I had a 3-week-old baby, you know, so it was like, yeah.
And of course, postpartum psychosis comes about from having babies, and it's not that abnormal. What happened from 1994? How did they let you out? What happened that allowed that?
They let me out quite peacefully, you know, and I was supposed to do a course of lithium for forever. I mean, this is the hard part. Like they will say, this is the rest of your life.
Right.
And I'm 34 years old, right? I'm like, just a minute here. I've lived a pretty full, good life for 34 years. And now you're telling me I'm mentally ill and I'm going to be on some drugs until I die.
Right.
Just a sec here. Well, I felt that the people who had been in my house on December 27th, these weirdo Christians with their insight into my life, they were abusive people and I flipped out on them. And so I feel like their effect on my life was a reality, but according to psychiatric care, that's my psychotic perceptions, right?
What we also know is that if we took all the diagnoses in the DSM that have to do with trauma, that, you know, many pages, very, very thick, small print book would be reduced to a pamphlet. And that's what you're talking about. You're talking about postpartum psychosis, which is a part of giving birth. And yes, giving birth is really wonderful and lovely and everything, but there's a lot of trauma that goes along with it too, in my opinion. That's my opinion, not everybody's, but.
Oh, I believe that. And I believe, you know, yeah, it was a time when I was really frail.
So how long were you on lithium?
Too long. And, you know, that's because of the lack of imagination in psychiatrists. Because the whole time I was on it, I was like, this is not helping me. This is not helping. There has to be another way. I need to get off this stuff. And it was 20 years. I raised my kids sedated, like badly sedated. And then one time I went in, I ended up in care, and the psychiatrist, he said, "Oh my goodness, your kidneys are shutting down. Your lithium has done terrible damage to your body." And then he said, because they also had me on antipsychotics, which is hilarious because years later, I was like, I don't think I've ever been psychotic. Like, I've never thought the Martians are coming to get me, or I'm Jesus Christ, or like, I've never.
No, but they give antipsychotics to people for just about everything.
I know. I've just felt sad. And then my most universal language when I'm sad and broken is, we need to be more childlike. And I think, is that psychotic?
No, that's a means of expressing. I mean, we don't grow up. Maybe the kids that are growing up now have a better ability to communicate their feelings. I know that for me. Yeah, me too. But for me, nobody taught me how to express my feelings, so we did it with language. We did it with acting out. We did it with facial expressions. We did it with the tone of our voice. But, we weren't necessarily upfront and able to do it, the way that probably is best. So you ended up on lithium. You were on antipsychotics. Were you on anything else?
No. Well, right now she says a big sigh. Right now I'm on Epival, which is a mood stabilizer. It's anti-seizure medication that they use on people they call bipolar.
Oh, and have you been diagnosed with bipolar?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
At first I was first I was postpartum psychotic, and then I was manic depressive schizoaffective. I thought that was funny. I kept saying, "Oh, does that mean I'm more effective in life?" Woo!
What did you think?
I win, schizoaffective, and it's like I said to the psychiatrist, I said, "That's one big hefty label you've just given me." I said, "What exactly does it mean?" He says, "Well, actually it means, Barb, we don't know what's wrong with you at all. We're just using it so we can use a larger, fuller margin of drug therapy on you."
Oh my Lord. That's actually a bit terrifying to me, Barbara.
And that doctor who realized lithium was killing me and antipsychotics were killing me, he switched her over to Epival. Okay, so when that switch happened, my sister said to me, "Oh, I've got my sister back," because that 20 years of being sedated and on antipsychotics, it robbed me of so much. And I really have an issue with that because I raised my 4 kids like that. The human sloth. Like right now I speak with a fair amount of articulation, but when I was on lithium, I was a sloth and I slurred my words and my brain was in slow motion. It was
wow.
What do I think? Where am I going? Who am I?
So the doctor got you off of these things?
But he put me on valproic acid.
Is that the Amplify? Epival. It's a mood stabilizer?
Yeah, that's what they call it. But it really is used for people with epilepsy to reduce the number of seizures they have.
Okay.
It does cause you to fire a bit slower, obviously.
Right.
But it was like, I don't know how many years ago, it was 5-6 years ago. I had a mental health worker, I had a psychiatrist, and we discussed that I was very stable. I was doing why not take Barb off Epival? Well, I did it.
And so was that the only time that you were committed, that one time? Or was there another time?
I've been committed many times.
Many times. Okay.
I can't even count how many. And it's a lot to do with my character too. It's like the last time I was in the hospital, they said that my delusions were, patient thinks she's a writer, which is funny because I am a writer.
Yes.
But that's the whole thing. I say, "Excuse me." So I'm not considered compliant, which.
Because you're not agreeing that you're not a writer, or?
Well, to them, they want to dictate to you who you are.
Yes.
Without even finding out who you are.
That's actually really crazy making.
It is. Right?
I mean, it's with, I see, I'm getting lost for words. I get a little overwhelmed at the idea that people are being forced to be in a place that is supposedly for your mental health, and you are forced to be dealing with people who are doing things that are crazy making for you.
Absolutely. It's like for you, Bernadine, if you were in the hospital and they said, well, Bernadine, you're not really a radio talk
Yes.
show. You just
Yeah.
think you're a radio
I know.
talk show.
And that's crazy making.
And what's going on right here is just some sort of contrived psychosis that you've set up.
Yes. Yeah. Barbara, thank you so much for coming and chatting with me. You have a lovely story.
Bernadine, for me, this is the way I see it. Like even when I called it incarcerated, when I'm in or when I'm out, I'm here for the revolution.
Yes.
And if I'm locked in, I'm working.
Good.
I'm working for the revolution. Like, so that's it. I'm not a pasty pushover. So
No.
there is strength and beauty in that. Like,
there is.
Let's not just say it's pathetic, right? It's got, I mean, I think of how many times I've been locked up. There's got to be a good purpose. Because if there's not, then yeah, I want to off myself. And I won't.
No,
right?
Of course not. Of course.
But the world is such that it says, wow, you're pretty pathetic. I'm sure you're really aware that people who have been institutionalized, we're marked cards. We're considered troublemakers. We cost the government so much money. There's so many things about us that's basically bad. Right?
Well, it's not only that, but they've also dehumanized us, right? And they've taken away human rights and made mental health consumers into second-class citizens. It's a crazy making system. And yes, David Oakes called for a revolution. I think it's incumbent on us all to participate in that.
I think so.
Okay. Well, thank you, Barbara. You're listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and as part of the show, talking about 988, I thought that perhaps it might be a good idea to talk about the sort of typical questions that they ask on a suicide risk screening assessment, just so that people understand when they hear these questions what the person is kind of looking for, because they can be vague, sort of open-ended questions. And if you're not careful, you end up answering it in a way that gives them a misunderstanding about what's true for you. So I'm going to go through this and talk about it. I'm doing this because I believe we all deserve to know what we are being asked to talk about and why. And that full disclosure is required so that an offhand comment or an ill-conceived answer doesn't end up with a dire consequence to you, i.e. police showing up at your door, handcuffing you, taking you to the hospital, stripping, all of that stuff that we just talked about. So let's look at the questions and why they're asking them. I suspect that mental health practitioners don't want you to know what is behind these questions and how they will be assessing your answers, because they may think that somehow that if you know that, you're going to lie. And I'm not asking you to lie here, but you do have a right to understand why they are asking these questions that are often, in my opinion, somewhat vague questions, and how they're going to interpret your answers. So know that as we go through these questions, answering yes to any one of the first four will alert the questioner that you are a risk to yourself. So let's start with the first one. In the past few weeks, have you wished you were dead? Truth is, if you've been going through a difficult time recently, death as a solution may well have crossed your mind, at least once, fleetingly, maybe even several times fleetingly. It may be the thing that goes through your brain to push you to find other solutions, i.e., this way of thinking is ending up at a dead end, literally. But ask yourself, are you meaning that you want to be dead? If not, then your answer here is no. Second question. In the past few weeks, have you felt that you or your family would be better off if you were dead? Consider the fact that much of what our mental health challenges are rooted in trauma, and that traumatized people, because we live in a society that victim blames far too often, will naturally think that the world would be better off without them and their disclosures and the things they have, in quotes, done wrong. Consequently, for someone who has been traumatized, being suicidal, i.e. feeling the world would be better off without them, may in fact be a very common idea. However, for them, it may also be that they just aren't able to see a way forward through a complicated social puzzle. It is hard when you have been victimized and are reeling with that to be someone who can objectively figure out how the world around you is complying or enabling an offender and try and sort that out is overwhelming if you add all the emotional stuff on top of it. Does it mean that you want to be dead, or does it mean you need another option to sort things out? If the latter, your answer is no. Question 3. In the past week, have you been having thoughts about killing yourself? Now you notice how these questions sort of double back on each other and they're all vague. So they're just trying to pull more information out of you as they ask each question. So here we are back at the beginning again. Consider the question. Have you thought about killing yourself? As in wishing you were dead, or as in a plan on how to die? The distinction is considerable. If in your mind you go back to question 1, think about answering it from that perspective. Do you want to be dead, or are you trying to figure out how to live despite the fact that you're unsure how? If the latter, say no. So what is also important to note here is if you are someone who is in the course of talking with folks often using the phrase, I want to die, or I wish I was dead, not because you do, but because it means you don't know how to fix this, or I don't know how to live with this. Be aware that other people may well interpret your comments at face value, that you want to die, that you are considering killing yourself. If it is not what you mean by those words, it is time to sit down with yourself and think about what you are truly trying to say and find a way to say that, because the former version can land you in the hospital. If instead what you say is, I don't know how to fix this, the people around you have so much more to work with to know how to help. I want to die, on the other hand, leaves them with one option to help, calling 911 or ignoring you. The fourth question, have you ever tried to kill yourself? And if yes, how and when did that happen? This question is used to assess whether or not you have made a serious attempt at suicide, and whether they say it or not, assessing your knowledge on how to actually affect death. If you say, I took a bottle of Tylenol, they will know that your skill level or knowledge base on how to actually make yourself unalive is limited and will not result in death. And it may also indicate that while you're acting on suicidal ideation, it is not done with the desire to die, as a bottle of Tylenol will not kill you. If you cut, but didn't cut deeply, they will make the same assessment. When they ask the question of when, they want to know how long ago was that. Several years, and they get a sense of how long you have lived with the ideas. Emphasis on the fact that you are alive and have lived with those ideas. And they can ask other questions, like, what was happening then? And with that, they get some idea of what triggered your suicidal ideation, and if that is happening now, or is this different? So think about it yourself. Were you trying to die, or were you trying to get someone's attention that you needed help and guidance so that you could live? If the latter, your answer is no. And if you answered no to all the original first 4 questions here, then the assessment questioning usually stops. If you answered yes to any of them, or refused to answer some of them, they will interpret that to mean that you are suicidal and that you have attempted in the past, and that makes an attempt now even more likely, and they will ask you the 5th and final question. And the 5th question is, are you having thoughts of killing yourself right now? And if so, please describe. So what are they looking for? Here they're trying to get an idea of the severity of your suicidal ideation and what supports you might need. Like, is your ideation immediate? They want to know what plan you have in place. Do you have a plan? And if so, what it is. And with that, they can assess whether or not the plan you are describing will in fact actually result in death. It may not change whether or not they pick you up and take you to the hospital, but it will show them to what degree you are serious in that planning. If you say no to number 5, Because you said yes to one of the first 4 questions, you will still be considered a potential risk to yourself and be detained so that you can be evaluated more deeply for the level of risk. In that detention, you may be taken to a hospital setting. Your belongings may well be confiscated. You may be forced to strip yourself or with the help or by force by security officers. Your body may be inspected for dangerous items, and you will most likely be given drugs, and you will likely be put in an isolation room and or restrained to ensure you cannot hurt yourself until the evaluation is complete. If you say yes to number 5, that your suicidal ideation and plans are immediate and that you describe a plan that will result in death, they will consider this a positive screen result, i.e., that you are an imminent risk. They will detain you, or in the case of a hotline call, dispatch authorities to gather you up. Again, you will be detained in a hospital, your belongings will be confiscated, you may be forced to strip, your body may be inspected for any dangerous items, you will most likely be given drugs, and you will be likely put in an isolation room and or restrained again to ensure that you cannot hurt yourself. These things are done in the mindset of protecting you from yourself. However, they can be quite traumatizing depending on your history of trauma. So there you go. That's what a suicide risk screening tool set of questions sounds like, and how most mental health practitioners or call lines will assess you for a suicide risk. So consider your answers and their implications as you provide information for their questions. How you answer will decide what they do. And remember, if they are a call line, they're coming at this and you with very little information about who you really are in all your complexities and what you're doing. They will not be able to fully take into consideration all that is true for you in those 5 short questions and your 5 short answers. If you give them any reason whatsoever to trigger an evaluation, they must take it to dispel any responsibility to them if you unalive yourself. You have a responsibility to yourself to answer them in a way that will ensure your needs are understood and not construed to mean something it doesn't, leading to what can be, often for folks, a traumatic scenario. But you can only do that if you're let in on what each question means and how your answers will be assessed. So I hope this helps you do that. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to contact me here at Rethreading Madness. Reach out. Happy to answer them. You've been listening to Rethreading Madness on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM. I'm Bernadine Fox, and that's our show. My thanks to Rob Wipond and Barbara Phillips for talking to us about 988 and forced committals. They have shared with us some important information. Please remember that all of us experience pain and come to desperate places in life at times. You are not alone. These feelings do not mean you're wrong or bad. You're not crazy or weak. It just means that right now you need some help coping. There are so many people out here that have been where you are and are ready and willing to share everything they know about how they survived and moved on from that place. So reach out and get the help you need. If you can't find that place that provides the help that you need, please reach out here to Rethreading Madness. And while we can't absolutely guarantee we can find that for you, we're certainly willing to do what we can to scour our resources to direct you as well as we can. Music today was by Sherry Ulrich. And to you, thanks for joining us today. You are why we do this program every week. So come back and join in our conversations about all things mental health as we work to change how society looks at these challenges. And in the meantime, stay safe out there. I'm Bernadine Fox, and you've just listened to Rethreading Madness, the podcast that dares to change how we think about mental health. We air live on Vancouver Co-op Radio, CFRO 100.5 FM, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. or online at coopradio.org. If you have questions or feedback about this program or want to share your story or have something to say to us, we want to hear from you. You can reach us by email, rethreadingmadness@coopradio.org. If you enjoyed this show, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.
I've never been further from knowing what the hell I'm gonna do when I can't seem to find my way under or over or through. Just when I'm ready to give up the fight, there you are when we turn out the lights, and it's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe it when you tell me everything's gonna be alright? Yeah. Why don't I wonder how you know? Well, surely you don't have all of the facts. You could be just making it up. Why don't I ever think of that? It's some kind of magic in the words that you breathe, saying, baby, take it from me. It's alright, it's alright. Don't you worry, it'll be alright. Why do I always believe it when you tell me everything's gonna be alright? Everything's gonna be alright. With anyone else, it's such a cliche, just words people say to be nice. Or somehow